Sorry to interrupt your thought process, Lee. I'm so sorry.
No worries. Good morning, Charlotte.
Okay, we are.
Good morning.
Yeah, so we are recording now. Okay, sorry about that. Thank you, Charlotte.
You're
All
welcome.
right, so to review, we're here this morning to discuss the CEU policy and to provide some clarification, or at least for the committee to have clarification, on the program content and activities that are being requested for CEU approval and how they relate to the practice of physical therapy, or to ensure that the content and activities are related to physical therapy. And so I sent out some notes to you all that highlighted what I felt to be the relevant portions of the statutes and rules related to continuing education. And then in addition to that, I sent out some guidance provided by the American Physical Therapy Association in the Guide to Physical Therapy Practice, and in which they define the practice of physical therapy. And so I'll open the discussion to the content that I sent out and the notes that I sent out. And so the floor is open for discussion.
I have a question about the content, if you don't mind.
Oh.
Has anyone searched the American Physical Therapy Association's website and the link within that to access continuing education to determine if they offer courses on these particular topics, on the Reiki, craniosacral cupping?
I did. Could not find anything in the Learning Center.
Because that certainly would create a precedent. I would think that we, might want to consider if our national organization does offer these particular topics as what they would consider approved content.
It's a good point. I don't know what was presented at Combined Sections this past year.
Okay.
So I don't know if any of the content at Combined Sections was related to complementary, and alternative therapies.
Sure.
And when I searched the Learning Center, I couldn't find content specific to, complementary alternative therapies.
Okay. I didn't want if we do reach a decision on some of this today or in the future, I don't think it would be great for it to be contradictory to what the APTA, although we have different missions, I don't think it would be great for it to be contradictory to what they're offering.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's why I looked at their guide to physical therapy practice.
Okay.
To look at, I think the position that I would like to submit that we adopt is that board-approved continuing education content and activities should align with the description of physical therapy practice that is established by statute and the guide to physical therapy practice from the American Physical Therapy Association. So that's that's the idea. That's the submission. That's the proposal. That we have got.
It leaves you to something in writing, so that's consistent instead of having, us say, is it or isn't it? It's kind of like, is it in the guide to practice, basically?
There are in the guide to physical therapy practice, does recognize that there are manual therapy interventions that are defined by the National Institutes of Health as complementary and alternative therapies. And those interventions include things like, manual lymphatic drainage, manual traction, connective tissue massage, therapeutic massage, mobilization, manipulation, and thrust techniques of soft tissues, spinal and peripheral joints, neural tissue mobilization, passive range of motion, and dry needling. So that's in the guide to physical therapy practice, and so if we referenced, that guide, and saying that, okay, the content needs to be in the guide, then I think that would be sound.
Just playing devil's advocate here, you said neurotissue mobilization. Wouldn't CST claim that's what they're doing, even though in reality it's not?
I'm not gonna make any claims about what they claim. I'm not going to make any statements about what they claim. What I will tell you, is that craniosacral therapy is recognized by the World Health Organization as an osteopathic technique, and it is included in the training of osteopathic physicians. What I will say is that the scope of regulatory authority that this board has does not extend to osteopathic physicians. And so we regulate the practice of physical therapy. So the fact that CST, or craniosacral therapy, was developed in the 40s by an osteopathic physician, and then the fact that it has gained popularity in our profession does not mean that it is necessarily, pertinent to the practice of physical therapy.
And I agree with you on that. I'm just for wording, when we put something in policy, just dealing with the craniosacral courses over the last several years, they try to bend in every way they can to make it fit into our policy and try to make something proactively to where we can definitively say this does not qualify as physical therapy.
Yeah, the APTA guide to practice is silent on craniosacral therapy. So there's nothing in the guide to practice, version 4.0, that references craniosacral therapy. So I mean, what I would argue is that the training in the craniosacral therapy training is separate and distinct, from the training that is received in physical therapy, degree programs. So it's separate and distinct training. It has separate and distinct philosophies and separate and distinct backgrounds. So if you are practicing craniosacral therapy, you are practicing craniosacral therapy. You are not practicing physical therapy. Just because a physical therapist implements or performs craniosacral therapy does not mean that it is physical therapy.
I love the direction it's going in, and I'm gonna play Frank's devil's advocate, because you have a bunch of whiny licensees and CEU providers that are going to bitch about this. So you did it in the past. What's different now? I am in favor of using that guide in your logic to regulate this, because I do think it's gotten out of hand for two reasons. One is this push for companies that provide education to get CEU credit as a carrot for people to attend. And that's not what we should be doing, which we all agree on. The second thing is, I'm going to jump to your response to Troy Bourgeois here. People are looking for easy ways to get continuing competence, and that's bullshit too, because, and I'm glad this is recorded for the public. This, I just realized that. Sorry. People are out here, and what he's asking for is like advocacy. That's not continuing competence. So I do think we need to crack down on some of this stuff and say that it needs to follow the scope of physical therapy practice, and remembering that personal scope and all that kind of stuff is not what we're regulating here. So, but we're not going to give you, CEUs for magic singing cups and stuff like that. You can use it in your clinic all you want. I don't care. But for continuing competence, we shouldn't be doing it. But I just wanted to point out that there are going to be a bunch of whiny people out there that are going to make lives miserable for Jessica and Charlotte and everybody else out there. And it may create more of these meetings. And that's the last thing I want to do, is have more meetings. So I just think having a solid policy that says, no, this is the policy, and we stick to it, is what we should be doing. So thank you for doing that, Lee.
Well, it's my pleasure. I mean, I think the policy, we have defined in statute the practice of physical therapy. And so like the idea is that is in the law. And so, we can refer to that statute. In addition, we can refer to the American Physical Therapy Association's Guide to Physical Therapy Practice. we are not as a body saying or trying to restrict in any way someone's ability to go out and gain additional education and training in the field of complementary and alternative medicine and therapies to provide as an adjunct, to their physical therapy plan of care. What we're saying is that the training that you receive is separate and distinct from your physical therapy training, and you need to go ahead and make sure that you're competent to perform those techniques, and your ability to maintain your competency in those techniques will be regulated by whatever governing body provided you with the training, and said that you were qualified to do so. So, because it's not physical therapy. Just because a physical therapist does something does not make it physical therapy. If you look at, Reiki, Reiki is Japanese, it was developed in Japan, and it is the belief that there is an energy system that flows through you that can be manipulated by a third party. That you can manipulate it yourself, and it can be manipulated by a third party. That is not in accordance with physical therapy training. That is a separate and distinct type of training. If you want to go and get trained to be a Reiki provider, we're not restricting that. We're just saying you cannot turn around, or at least my proposal is that we're saying that you cannot turn around and then use that training towards your biannual license renewal requirements that are regulated by this body. So we're not restricting your practice whatsoever. We're
I
just
think
saying
that'd
that
be a
those are
great thing to add
separate.
to the rest of the policy.
Pardon?
I think that might be a great thing to put at the beginning of the policy. We're not restricting what courses you can take. However, to obtain credit, it must meet these standards.
And I'm not responsible for the decisions that this committee made prior, to my coming on the board. And I'm not responsible for any course approvals that were made prior to my coming on the board. I'm just trying to serve the board, and serve the licensees or the citizens of this state, in the best way that I can.
So I like that, adding that to the beginning of the policy for one reason. We get a question at the board office, or at least we used to. I haven't had this in a while. Let's say it's a PTA and they'll say, can I take a dry needling course? And what the board office responds, what we say is we don't restrict. The board doesn't say you can't take any education. Now, whether or not you can practice what you learn in the classroom is a different story, but like, we don't restrict you from taking any coursework. Now, would they be able to use a board-approved dry needling coursework for renewal? Yeah, because it doesn't say PTA board-approved or PT board-approved. And I don't know, if that's maybe something we need to look at as drilling down if they're not using it for their practice. That's just a thought. But I really like that idea of adding that to the beginning of the policy. Not that everyone reads a policy, but it would protect the staff as well, because we tell people that. And one day, look, Jessica's thumbing out, because, we've been told to say that by the board, but it's not in writing anywhere. So we actually are putting ourselves at risk to an extent if a new group of people came in and they said, well, what gives you the right to say that? So I love that idea. And I love the idea of also referring to statute and the guide to PT practice. One question about that is, how often does it change, the guide for PT practice?
Oh, can you comment on that?
It doesn't change very often. I think we're on our 4th edition.
Yeah, we're in the 4th
And-
edition of it.
Yeah, and it's been like 20 years. So it's not going to change every year by any means.
So I like referencing it just as, the current. Because, if it changes, we don't have to change our policy. I think it makes a lot of sense. Another thing that I have a question about it, and I don't want to cut any of y'all off on y'all's thoughts if anybody else wanted to add anything. But I had a comment about the request to be able to do activities for CE credit. Because in the rule 195, it gives opportunity for activities outside of specific coursework. And, you know, getting a American Board of Physical Therapy specialty, a residency, a fellowship. I remember there's like mentorship, graduating from a program. If you go back, so all of these things you can have activities, and we always do look for more activities. You know, what else can you do? Like a board approved general practice assessment tool. So if you want to assess yourself and like come up with a plan, that's great. So whenever Troy brought up the idea, he had spent hours and hours and hours developing a course to say, and his example to me was dentists, which this actually kind of is, it hit home with me a little bit because of my recent surgery. Whenever I actually went on my own to speech therapy to make sure that I addressed a tongue thrust. And because I didn't want to relapse from my surgery, but my surgeon never suggested that. My orthodontist never suggested that ever throughout the entire process. So I went to speech therapy. She said, God, I wish that they would educate patients because you're not going to have as good of outcomes if you don't address the source of the problem. And of course, because I work with a bunch of PTs, I had heard that as well. And so I was like, okay, that makes sense. So whenever Troy told me, he was like, yeah, it's like, you know, we're developing courses to go out and talk to dentists because we have the same patients and we can tell them about how physical therapy can benefit their patients. And he's like, it's hours and hours and nobody has motivation to go out and do this. Nobody wants to take their time to go out and talk to other professionals. Is it an incentive to get like referrals? It could be that, right? That could be an incentive for people to go out. But other than that, they have no other incentive in terms of what like getting the word out so that patients understand that there's more to their care than, you know, just, you know, getting the surgery. There's other things that you need to consider. So whenever he put it like that, I was like, that's a good point. And he was like, so I think if they got CE credit for it, then they might come up with creative ideas and, you know, develop courses and do all this type of stuff. And I was like, that's a really creative model that we hadn't thought of before. And I said, the way that we did it in rule is that we added the activities into the policy first. We let those activities play out. So we got the word right. And then eventually we put it in rule once we needed the wording work. Because once you put the wording in rule, it's really hard to change. So I'm not saying that y'all should or should not, you know, agree that people should get CEs for this, but I just wanted to tell y'all about like the verbal conversation I had with him and why I was like, this is really something that we might want to consider. Because I think it is kind of cutting edge. But I also see how it could be considered advocacy and us offering CEs for advocacy. And I would not want us to have that type of, you know, reputation of doing something like that, like any sort of, because that's not really the way that I viewed it whenever he said it from a patient's perspective. However, I can see that side of the coin as well, of course. So I'll be quiet now so y'all can talk.
Oh, it's fine. Thank you, Charlotte. Charlotte, I would submit, as I did in my response, you know, to the licensee, that we already have in rule the provisions by which he can get CEU credit for creating a course. You know, under Rule 195C1, teaching of an approved clinical or preventive course or activity, a licensee can receive 2 hours of credit for each contact hour approved for the course or activity, not to exceed 10 hours. And this credit will be given only for the first time the course is presented during the renewal period. That's already in rule.
Well, so the question is, because it says teaching an approved course.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, so it's approved for dentists to take it by the dental board, but we didn't approve it for the PTs. So is it considered an approved course because it's approved by a different board, or does it have to be approved by our board?
Troy would need to submit it to this body for approval.
So
And
that's
once and then once it was approved, yes, Jessica.
I don't want to interrupt. I can wait.
Oh, no, go ahead.
No, I was just going to clarify too that he had a conversation with me first and then he contacted Charlotte, and the way I presented it, and I asked him, I said, when we talked about an approved course and teaching an approved course and get credit for it, I asked him, I said, well, did any PTs or PTAs attend the course? Because that's definitely like a reason to even retroactively have it submitted. And I could be wrong, but what I thought he expressed to me is that in the previous years, they didn't like gear it towards PTs or PTAs, or maybe it wasn't marketed. I'm not sure the language, but he said in future year, like now they plan to do that. And I was like, you definitely should should submit it then, like if you're continuing to do this, like get credit for it. So I just wanted to provide a little bit of the additional background of like my conversation too.
Thank you for that context. What I will submit is that Rule 195C1 does not indicate who the audience is. It makes no reference to the audience. It simply makes a reference that you are teaching a board-approved course, and you can get credit up to 2 hours of credit for each contact hour the board approves. And so you can't, and you can't exceed 10 hours, in the renewal period. So it's
But Lee,
already in rule.
that's the point, Lee, is it's not approved for PTs. That's the sticking point. If it was approved for PTs, it's not an issue.
Has it been
But-
submitted and denied?
No, he hasn't submitted it. That's what Jessica's saying.
Yeah, and like when I talk to core sponsors, they're usually less inclined to submit something to us if PTs aren't going to be taking it, or like it's not
Right.
happening in Louisiana. That I should have provided that as well. My bad.
It-
That was another part of the context, is that that's usually why core sponsors won't submit if they choose not to.
I have no problem if we approve a course that you get credit for teaching it. If this is a CME course for physicians that we didn't approve, we shouldn't be giving credit for it. And
If you're teaching a CME course, I mean, so I teach in the graduate medical program at Willis-Knighton. And so I go and speak to the residents, on an annual basis, the new residents that we have, about physical therapy. And I specifically talk about the role of physical therapy in the management of musculoskeletal spinal pain. And so I provide them, with education about our role, in the interdisciplinary team approach. Okay. If I was so inclined to submit this coursework, to the board for approval, because it is directly related to the role of physical therapy in the healthcare system, then this body could determine whether or not that course met the requirements, of the policy, and could be awarded credit, towards my license renewal. And if this body said no, it's not approved, that's fine. It would not detract me from teaching the course. I don't teach the course and I don't speak to the residents because I can get CEUs.
but you're not getting, that's what we're talking about, Lee, is that you wouldn't get credit yourself for teaching it or taking it, right? So the problem that I have in your case, if you got your course approved and you taught it, then you will get credit for teaching it, right? We all agree on that. That's what the rule says. In this instance, the thing that bothered me about it is when you look at 195A, number 1 says update knowledge required for competent performance beyond entry level. So if I'm going and I'm saying how great physical therapy is to a bunch of dentists, it doesn't meet that because it's not beyond entry level, is it? Right? So to Lee's point, what Troy has to understand is if the course was approved for physical therapists as a CEU course, he can get credit for it. If it was not approved, he can submit it, as Lee said, and we can review it and say, is it approved for physical therapists to attend? Does that sound fair?
Could he apply for individual approval, or that doesn't make sense in this case?
Ooh.
I'm just
Why do you
thinking of
have to do
scenarios.
that? Why do you have to say that? It's approved. To me, individual approval is approved.
We've had it happen, but I think the issue is he's actually renewing right now and he missed the deadline for that, if that was the
See?
plan.
No,
That's
but
the
he
point.
said he doesn't need it to renew.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
These
he said that he
people
doesn't need it
fish
to
for
renew.
CEUs.
And then the argument that we should be providing, liberal CEU credit for the preparation of the educational course, and for the preparation and the work that goes into creating a course. I'm sure Phil can speak to this far better than I can, but what I will tell you is that educators spend more time preparing their coursework and updating their coursework, than they actually get credit for in the academic environment. And so the idea is that you actually get, you get credit for teaching the course. You don't get credit for developing the course. So I created 2 courses for Northeastern University in Boston. I only get paid when I actually teach the course. I don't get paid to update the course, and I didn't get paid anything to develop the course. Okay, but I get paid when I teach the courses. And so I would not be in favor, of suggesting that we give liberal CEU credit, to any, licensee who's developing educational content.
Right.
And you do get a maximum under, in rule, 195 C9, you get a maximum of 5 hours of credit for actually publishing a scientific paper. Okay, we're not giving credit for all the work that goes into writing, editing, and the re-edits of that paper before it actually gets published. You get 5 hours of credit for publishing a scientific paper. So unless we're going to go back and look at all of these CEU hours and completely change the awarding of CEU credit, for the work that goes into actually teaching the course, publishing the paper, doing the textbook, publishing the textbook chapter, doing a platform presentation at an annual meeting, the current rule does not provide, any credit for the work that goes into that. And so, unless this body was in favor of changing, the entire rule, then I don't see any justification for moving forward with that, with that proposal. Any comment on that?
No, I
I agree with that.
And I reject the idea that the fact that you don't get CEUs is going to in some way disincentivize providers from going out and providing education. People who want to be educators and people who want to go out and educate the public, educate other professions are going to do that regardless of whether or not they get CEU credit. So, it's not a disincentive. I would argue it's a professional responsibility to educate, other disciplines to the role of your profession within the, U.S. healthcare system.
Thought as a CEU, and this is more of like an education and outreach committee type of conversation, I think, is what I'm thinking. But like, if they're just in your day-to-day life, if you think of any ways that we could get important information to the public, and incentivize our licensees to do that through CE credit, doesn't sound like the way to do it, right? Because we've always had this kind of challenge, like we'll get questions from state government that say, how are you educating the public about this? And we're like, we have our licensees emails, but we can't just like send out the state of Louisiana stuff, do we do a PSA? What do we do? And recently, actually at that conference, an old board member, Sue Bortel, was talking about how she works in the correctional facility. And she was like, hey, some of the inmates want to know if they can become PTs later. And I'm like, I don't know, because of your criminal history. What do y'all tell them? And I'm like, oh, there's like a pre-application eligibility determination process now in law in Louisiana for any profession, not just PT, like any of the profession that they want to do. So I was like, we could reach out to our PTs and PTAs working in the correctional facilities, and that's how we can get the word out to the public. But it's like so hard for us to think of ways to get the word out to the public. So like, this was where I was going with Troy, is that like, oh, this is a way to get the word out to the public, because you have like the dentists who are working on the people who might need PT, and they're the public. Not that they should get CE credit for it. But I do think that like, as y'all are thinking through things, like now that we've had this conversation, just like if you ever come up with any ideas that are creative that or have never been thought of before, like voice those and like bring those up so that we can think of ways, probably not CE credit, but we can think of ways to like implement projects where we can get the word out to the public on things that we have information on, like either, regulatory processes or things that would be good for the patients or safety concerns or anything that's within our scope. So just wanted to put a plug out there.
Charlotte.
Hey, Charlotte. I have a question related to what you're just talking about getting the general information out to the public. And I apologize for not having any knowledge on this, but does this board have a social media presence?
So we have a YouTube page.
Okay, because immediately, I think about it from a general public standpoint. If I'm trying to learn about a particular topic, let's say it's PT related, un-PT. If I'm trying to learn how to install my new garage door opener, the first thing I do is do a Google search and either go to a website or go to YouTube. So that's how, as a member of the general public, if I'm trying to gain knowledge about a subject, that's the first thing I do. So I think if you're trying to streamline and create an opportunity for the general public to gain knowledge about changes or ideas that we have, we need to start with sharing it via social media or via our YouTube page. Now, obviously, I think it would be great to go onto our website if it's something that we want to share in that fashion. But I think it begins and ends there because that is the single most efficient way that a modern member of society gains knowledge about a particular topic.
A lot of them use TikTok too. I mean, a lot of them, will do things on, a lot of, companies and providers and so forth put things on TikTok because TikTok is, is pretty widely used, by at least, 18 to 25-year-olds.
Yeah, so I don't disagree with you that TikTok and Instagram are the way that people, spend their time. Don't disagree. I believe that TikTok's been banned from state
Yes.
devices.
Yes.
We're a state agency.
That's
And
not
I
an
did-
option for us.
Yeah, I do think that there's we did have a social media policy. We rolled out the whole social media thing. And the thing was, we just didn't have the capacity to keep up with it in order to have a real presence, like we were posting board meetings, things like that. We thought about like having a committee that could help us develop like a schedule of FAQs, or we could like post a question and have an answer and like things like that. And it just ended up being down the list on the priorities at the time. So what I would suggest is that if we're gonna bring this topic up, we bring it up at the we're planning on having a board retreat. And looking in preparation of our strategic plan, the next one. And we look at if this should be a priority or not. And we need to look at the resources behind that because our current resources wouldn't be able to support it in a way that would be effective or successful currently. So we'd have to have a plan. And I know that sounds lame because we are like in the, 21st century over here, but it might sound really lame that we have a really hard time having a good social media presence.
Being
At this-
good at social
you know-
media is a skill, though. Just saying.
Mhm.
It
No,
is.
absolutely, 100%. I mean, and
That's-
being successful in your efforts to market through social media is a skill.
Yeah.
I mean that takes a lot of work. To
Get an intern. Get an intern to do it. No,
Again,
they know how to do this stuff.
we have gone down that road as well. It has not been successful at this point, but we would have to have it as a higher priority. And we can do that if that is what we're directed to do at some point. And I think we need to discuss it at the retreat 100%, because if it is something that is like, this really is a need, like, so
Well,
I don't.
even if you don't, let's say, even if you don't have the budget or the manpower, whatever it is to, reinstitute what you had done previously on social media or even expand it. The scrolling bar at the top of the board's webpage, which provides information now, maybe that could be expanded. I utilize that all the time. Younger PTs who, are just getting their feet wet and really don't pay that great attention to what they should pay attention to related to their practice and the board and the Practice Act. That's the first place I send them, because we all know we get mass emails from lots of different groups and companies and you name it, and we tend to ignore them because we get inundated with
Yes.
emails all the time. I still think email's great. but I use email as a massive way of communication at work day to day. Not everybody does who's a PT. It's an afterthought for after work for them. So at a minimum, if we can't do social media, we need to at least continue to utilize the scroll function at the top of the web page to provide as much information as possible. Because if you do a keyword search on Google, it's going to send you to the website if those keywords are in some of those little nuggets of information that's on that scroll function.
Yeah, and we have a new feature on our website too, that's a newsroom, which Phil, you're featured on there. I don't know if you saw it. See, if we had social media, we would have blasted out that we had a new news on there and everyone would know.
Right.
Charlotte, would it be possible, or would it be considered advocacy? Because I just checked, and so the APTA's guide to physical therapy practice is gated, and you have to be a member to access it. And so the idea is, if we're going to, if we recognize that, only 1 out of 4 licensees in the state are members of the APTA of Louisiana, and the APTA, and only 1 in 5 licensees in the country are members of the APTA. If we're going to reference a document from the American Physical Therapy Association that licensees have to go to if they're considering submitting for content for CEU credit, can we in some way provide access to that guide through the board?
I actually believe that it is accessible just with an account. You don't have to be a member. So I can try and verify that. But I think Charlotte.
Yeah, we could verify that because we're not members.
Yeah, I think, it says log in or subscribe, already an APTA member or non-member guide subscriber.
There you
So
go.
you can subscribe to the guide and not be a member.
Correct.
So I think if we are going to move forward and put in policy that the APTA's guide to physical therapy practice is a guiding document, for which we make determinations, about the relevancy of proposed continuing education, and the ability to get credit for it, I think we should provide access to the guide for licensees.
And Lee, more than that, in the statute 2405, under the powers and duties of the board, Part B, where it says the board may, number 14, adopt by reference all or part of the following codes, guides, and standards of the American Physical Therapy Association Code of Ethics, Guide for Professional Conduct, Standards of Ethical Conduct for Physical Therapy Assistant, and Guide for, all that. So if those were locked documents, and our unprofessional conduct rule 345 says that, number 1 under unprofessional conduct is that you're not following minimum standards for prevailing physical therapy practice. And if you look in definition 123, it defines it as those APTA documents. If you can't access those, then that's a big problem.
I agree.
So CE, I think it's totally appropriate to put it in the CE policy because we put it everywhere else too, personally.
I have a question. Would it be unethical in terms of sharing the information if we had web pages that had the guide on the page? Like, is it unethical for us to put that on our website because they have it behind a account login? Or I don't know.
I would just ask
for
permission.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, the board, I guess, correct me if I'm wrong, but the board would have to have a subscription to the guide in order to be able to post it on the board's website. And then we would just have to get permission from the APTA to provide licensees in Louisiana access to that document or that website, because it's in a website now, but provide access to that website using our subscription, using the board's subscription.
I would say we don't need a subscription. What I would do is ask Charlotte to go to FSBPT and ask them about that because they're in bed with the APTA already. So sorry. Yes.
So, okay. So Okay,
And I gotta run, guys. Sorry.
okay.
Y'all have a good day.
Oh, thank you for your time.
Thanks.
Um. So, okay. I know that we used to, on our website, we used to have links. We used to have a resource page with links. And it would just link to out external sites. I think that that's probably the safest thing, because if we put a document up there, I know Sharon Dunn said that the APTA is about to update their code of ethics and stuff like that. So if anything gets updated, we'll have to update it too. It's better just to link, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, and they would have to, if you link it and and it brings you to the guide to physical therapy practice, the issue would be, how would a licensee who's not a subscriber to the guide to physical therapy practice be able to access the content behind that gate?
So the concern is that they'd have to subscribe to it, and that's concerning.
I mean, so if we're saying, I mean, we're saying, that we're going to make determinations based, in part, on the guide to physical therapy practice, and which we have the authority to do so. Then, in order for someone to be able to have access to the guide to physical therapy practice, do you feel that not having access to that would be a problem for licensees?
Yeah. Yeah, but don't they get that when it, like, don't they find out how to have access to that when they're in college?
Yeah, the schools will advocate for membership to the APTA, yes. And the schools will advocate for membership to the state chapter. And then you can become a student member, of the American Physical Therapy Association and the state chapter at discounted rates. Once you graduate, then you have to pay the full price for membership.
So whenever we get off the call, I'll see if I can access it, because I'm not a member, clearly. So I'll see if I can access it. Is the concern if I can access it for free, but I have to subscribe? That's a concern, that you're subscribing to something that you're requiring to the subscription.
I don't know if the subscription, it has a fee associated with it, honestly. You'd have to see if you can access it, without, having to pay a fee.
Yeah, annual subscription to the APTA Guide to Physical Therapy Practice. Sounds like it's an annual subscription. Okay. Yeah, annual subscription rates.
How much is it?
$130 a year
Okay.
for an individual. Which
Yeah. So
I have access to it, so I don't know if maybe a board member printed it for me, but I have, because I have it printed out in my practice app.
you have a physical copy of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you can order a physical copy of the guide. It's now, online.
So to Phil's point, he's saying contact the FSBPT and ask them how to navigate this.
Yeah, I mean, if moving forward, if we're in agreement that we're going to use the description of physical therapy practice that is already in statute, and we're going to use, in addition to that, the guide to physical therapy practice, from the American Physical Therapy Association, as the documents, or the guidelines for which we're going to make determinations, about the content and activities associated with prospective educational courses, to receive continuing education credit, then, I guess if you're not a member of the APTA and you don't subscribe to the guide, do we foresee that being a problem?
Yes.
Because
More so from the CEs, more so related to unprofessional conduct.
I gotta jump off, everybody. I'm sorry. Thanks.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Appreciate it. Y'all have a good day.
I know, I feel like our CE committee talked about a lot more than CEs today, but.
Chris, what do you think about the ability to have access to the guide to physical therapy practice?
I think it's a great thing. I was trying to see, if I can access it or what I could do. I could Google a good bit of it without putting any numbers in. I just went straight to Google search APTA guide to practice, and I was able to pull up a good bit of it. I think that if we put it into if we reference it, we're gonna have to have some way of the licensee finding that or looking at it.
I mean, do you think so? In my notes that I sent you all, I, cited, portions of the guide to physical therapy practice, that define physical therapy practice. So, could we include that in the policy, or would that be just too cumbersome?
Hmm. So you're just saying like copy and paste the language.
Yeah. And then cite it.
Oh, yeah.
And as long as we're giving credit, we should be okay. We're quoting from this.
We're saying that the American Physical Therapy Association defines the practice of physical therapy as such, and you put it out there, and just like I did in the document that I sent you all.
I mean, it's not a problem for me to cite this on the website and everything and add that to it. That if I don't know if that's exactly the question, but I think it's fine.
I mean, I think as long as we cite it, and we give it its proper citation, then
That-
we can use it.
Yeah, that's no issue for us. The issue, I'd want to clear it with the APTA only because if they're requiring a subscription and we're copying and pasting it on our website, like, I don't know if they may take it up with us somehow. I don't know the laws behind all that.
Yeah, and obviously there's copyright laws, that are associated. I mean, this is their content.
Yeah.
This is not our content. But if we're going to use their content to make determinations of whether or not a course is eligible for CEU credit, or for then I mean, like I said, I'm strongly in favor of doing so. It's just a matter of the logistics of how can we do that, and Charlotte, you already said we already reference other APTA documents in statute. There's already
You
a reference
reference
to
that document. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think moving forward, like I said, we can, make an amendment to the policy and include a reference to the use of that document, and then update the policy, accordingly, and then, like I said, then when we make determinations about things, like Reiki or craniosacral therapy, or cupping, or other types of complementary and alternative medicine therapies, like I said, we can, as a rationale, to the licensee to say, okay, no, this is not going to be, you're not going to be awarded CEU credit for this because it doesn't align with the definition of physical therapy practice as in statute, and doesn't align with the description of physical therapy practice according to the APTA's guide to physical therapy practice. And that's just simply the statement that we provide them. This course content does not align with these guiding principles.
I really like that because, it's not an opinion of a group of people and it could change. And then, like whenever you change at the regulatory level, it gets confusing for licensees. It's just very consistent.
And that's my intent. Like I said, I can't explain why courses in craniosacral therapy or cupping or Reiki have been approved by this body. I can't explain that. The idea is those services are not physical therapy. And even though those courses are taken by physical therapists, they can take them, but that's not physical therapy. And that's not physical therapy as defined by the law, and it's not physical therapy as defined by the American Physical Therapy Association.
So if we are changing the policy to say this, do we need to, our next renewal cycle for CEs, do we need to pay attention? Because isn't there a process, like if you've been renewed before, then they potentially could be renewed without a policy change being like I guess I'm thinking the technical requirements on our website. We may have to not allow for the renewal to be as streamlined as we originally intended for courses whenever a policy changes occur. So that the next time that they go to apply the same course, we may say the policy has changed and this time you're not going to be approved.
It's right now, when we do a renewal, we're strictly looking at references. If it was previously renewed, they resubmit their references, and all we look at for a renewal right now is just the references to make sure those align with policy.
And they have to verify that the speaker hasn't changed, the time hasn't changed, like all those things. And then they can submit for renewal.
Sorry,
I was
Jess?
gonna, oh.
Mhm.
No, I was just gonna say to Charlotte, in terms of the renewal, I think we could, if this is what we go towards, move towards, we could just remove the capability for the time being for renewals. I
Mhm.
can ask and see if that's a possibility to just kind of shut that off for right now. If the policy changes and then everyone would be forced to submit brand new applications, I can ask. I don't know the answer. But I'll put it on the list of things I'm keeping.
Okay, thank you.
And I do agree with Phil, and I think that we're going to have a lot of licensees who are not happy with moving in this direction, and because they're going to see it as in some way trying to restrict their scope of practice, in some way. So it has to be clear that this is in no way any kind of restriction on your ability to go out and get additional education. If you want to go and get trained in cupping, which is a form of traditional Chinese medicine. Cupping was developed, under Chinese medicine. It was not developed by physical therapists. It was not developed in the United States. Cupping is a form of traditional Chinese medicine. If you want to go get trained in traditional Chinese medicine and do acupuncture, acupressure, other types of Chinese medicine, that is not physical therapy. Okay, and so you can go out and do that. Okay, you're not going to get credit towards your biennial license renewal requirement as a physical therapist for doing so.
I just really appreciate as a staff member the idea of having this in policy, because as much as possible, I like to just directly quote and share that information so that they understand it's not me just saying this, it's coming from a policy, the board, et cetera. It would just be very helpful.
Like I said, we have plenty of provisions that are already in rule and in statute to guide the determination, of what is and what is not physical therapy. And again, just because a physical therapist does something does not mean it's physical therapy. So it is, and that is something that our profession has struggled with for years. The identity of the profession has been an ongoing debate, for as long as I have, been a physical therapist. And Chris, I'm sure you can appreciate that as well. Okay. So, physical therapy is a profession. It is not a series of interventions that are performed. Okay, we are an allied healthcare provider. We are an integral part to the medical system. We are a profession. We are not defined by the interventions that we provide. And so, the APTA in their guide to physical therapy, has made clear indication of their position on what a physical therapist is and what the practice of physical therapy entails. And there's nothing about energy fields. There's nothing about manipulating energy fields. There's nothing about a craniosacral rhythm or manipulating a craniosacral rhythm. And there's no reference to Chinese medicine.
I need to go soon, and I do apologize, but I wanted to make sure that I understand what our next steps were at the conclusion of this meeting. And if what I'm hearing is correct, that I will for sure contact and inquire with the website, with Covalent Logic, our website company, to see if it's possible, just ask to turn off the automatic, like the ability to renew a course right now, and maybe just make everyone just do full applications. I think I don't know if Charlotte, if you're doing this or if I'm doing this or we're helping each other do this, but contact FSBPT and APTA and ask about access to cite their guide to practice. And then the third one is after we get those answers, then we would update the policy draft to include the statement at the top, not restricting, what you can practice within your scope, but the, this is how you can get CEUs essentially. And then to also add the citations if we're allowed to the APTA guide. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'd say make those edits first.
Okay.
Something like those with the CE committee, get their blessing on it so we can put it on the dashboard for the board meeting.
Perfect. Okay.
And then we can work on the other
Yes,
stuff.
I'm more than happy to help you with the language.
Okay. That would be great. I will, I'll draft something and maybe I can send it. We can go back and forth a little bit. Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
Well, yep.
Fantastic.
I'll reach out to FSBPT.
You will? Okay.
Then in reference to the licensee, like I said, I drafted a response, to the licensee, and the recommendation, is that, the licensee submit his educational course content and activities to the board for review and for approval. And then in the event it becomes an approved course, then he can receive credit, as established by the rule.
And that's a good idea, because if you just open it up for educational opportunities, the actually back end of how to figure out how to do approvals would be monstrous. If they're submitting for a board approved course, that makes it cut and dried.
Submit the content to the board for review. We'll determine, if it's approved. If it's an approved course, then there are already provisions for how you can get credit for a board approved course.
Okay.
Okay.
Charlotte, are you responding to Troy since he originally emailed you, or would you like me to respond? How would you like to do that?
I can do it.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure. Excellent. Okay. So I've got some clear directives I'm going to work on for myself, get something drafted for Lee to start sharing with you to try to get this prepared prior to the board meeting. Awesome. Thank you all so much for your time. Charlotte, also thank you to you for being here. I know you're not always asked to be on these, but I really appreciate it. I know it takes time out of your day. So thank y'all. And
Thank
I'm
you,
gonna let you.
Jessica.
Thanks.
Y'all have a good
All
one.
right, thank y'all.
You can stop the recording then. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm doing that now.
Thank you.